They say blood is thicker than water, but no one warns you that blood can also drown you. I never thought my own son and daughter-in-law would plan my death for money. Yet one night at exactly 9:15 p.m., a simple question, "Mom, are you alone?" changed everything. If only they knew that I wasn't the same trusting mother anymore. Stay with me, because what happened next turned their perfect plan into their greatest mistake. I remember that evening too clearly, the kind of night where silence felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. My name is Margaret Whitmore, 60 years old, widowed and until recently, the proud matriarch of one of the most respected families in the city. My late husband built a real estate empire worth millions, and after his death, I was left with everything: our mansion, the business shares, and 3 properties spread across the coast. But where there is money, there is greed. My son, Victor, used to be my greatest joy, until he married Patricia, a woman whose beauty masked something darker. When I first met her, she was all charm, elegant, polite, helpful. But after Victor's father died, her behavior shifted. Subtle things at first, questions about my will, about my health, about whether I lived alone in that big, empty house. Then came the nightly calls. Every evening at exactly 9:15 my phone would ring and Patricia's soft voice would ask, "Mom, are you alone tonight?" At first, I thought she cared about me. But after the 10th night in a row, something inside me began to ache with suspicion. There was always that same question, always the same tone. Fake concern covering something sharper. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking. That grief was making me paranoid. But one night, I caught her slip. She thought she'd hung up, but I heard her whisper to Victor, "She's still awake. We'll have to wait." That's when my blood turned cold. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, the phone still in my hand, replaying every detail. What were they waiting for? What did she mean by still awake? The next morning, I called Officer Martin Hale, an old friend of my husband's and a trusted police investigator. I didn't want to believe my own family could be plotting something, but Martin's calm voice on the other end gave me strength. "Margaret," he said, "don't panic. We'll take precautions. But from now on, don't ignore your instincts." For days I kept acting normal, hosting dinners, attending charity events, smiling when Patricia dropped by. But inside, I was watching her every move. I noticed how her eyes scanned the hallways, the jewelry drawers, even the safe in my study. One evening I tested her. "Patricia," I asked casually, "if something ever happened to me, what would you do with this house?" She smiled sweetly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, Mom, I'd keep it in the family. You know I love this place." But her eyes said something else, something cold and hungry. After that, I started keeping the lights on at night and leaving the TV running so it would sound like someone else was home. The fear of betrayal eats at you quietly, like termites in old wood. You can't see it at first, but it's already hollowing you out from the inside. Then one evening, Victor stopped by unannounced. His visit felt staged. He asked about my health, about my medications, about whether I'd changed my will recently. When I told him nothing had changed, he looked almost disappointed. "Mom," he said gently, "maybe you should start transferring some assets now, before something unexpected happens." The words hit me like a slap. Before something happens. That night I cried quietly, not from fear, but from heartbreak. How could my own son, the boy I raised, stand there and speak like a vulture circling prey? The next morning, I told Martin everything. He didn't seem surprised. "Margaret," he said, "I think your daughter-in-law is pushing him into this. We'll need to catch them in the act. If we wait, you might not get another chance." I stared at him, trembling. "What do you mean, catch them?" He leaned closer. "You're going to tell her exactly what she wants to hear. You'll tell her you're alone." The plan was simple, terrifying, and brilliant. I would pretend to be defenseless, home alone on a Friday night. Martin's team would be nearby, hidden. We'd record everything. The following evening, when Patricia called right on time, I answered with a shaky breath. "Hi, darling." "Hi, Mom. Are you alone tonight?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. For the first time, I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I am. Just me tonight." There was a pause. Just long enough for me to know she'd taken the bait. She ended the call quickly, saying she'd talk to me tomorrow. But I knew she wouldn't wait till then. I locked every door and window, turned off most of the lights, and waited by the upstairs window where I could see the driveway. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. The grandfather clock downstairs ticked louder than ever. At exactly 11:42 p.m., headlights appeared at the end of the road, slow, cautious. A car rolled up to the gate and stopped. Two men got out first. Patricia followed behind them, dressed in black, her hair tied back tightly, her face sharp with focus. She wasn't the daughter-in-law I'd known. She was a stranger. As they crept toward the house, I whispered into the small earpiece Martin had given me, "They're here." His voice came softly through the static. "Stay calm, Margaret, we've got you." But as I watched her step into the moonlight, something inside me cracked. This wasn't just revenge. This was heartbreak wearing a familiar face. Still, I held my breath, because if I broke now, if I made one mistake, Patricia would win. The air outside was so still that even the crickets had gone silent. I stayed by the window, my hands trembling as I clutched the phone. From the shadows, I watched Patricia gesture to the two men with her. They moved with purpose, one carrying a crowbar, the other a small flashlight wrapped in cloth to dull its beam. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was weak. But I was ready. The security lights near the porch flickered as they disabled the motion sensors. Patricia looked toward my bedroom window once, just for a second, as if sensing I was watching her. My breath caught. Even from this distance, I could see the steel in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was determination. I crouched lower, whispering into the earpiece. "They're breaking in from the back door." Martine's calm voice came through immediately. "We see them. Do not move, Margaret. We're closing in." But waiting was the hardest part. Every second stretched endlessly. Every creak of the old house sounded like a warning. I could almost hear my late husband's voice saying, "Be careful who you trust, Margaret." Downstairs, glass cracked, a faint, sharp sound. Then, slow footsteps. I gripped the phone tighter, my heart hammering against my ribs. Patricia's voice carried softly through the dark hallway. "Check the study first. That's where she keeps the safe." Her tone was cold, businesslike. My stomach twisted. That same voice had once called me Mom. They split up, one man heading to the left, the other toward the kitchen. Patricia followed last, wearing gloves, scanning every corner like she'd been here 1,000 times. She had. Then, just as planned, I made my move. I stepped into the hallway upstairs and flicked on the chandelier. The sudden light poured through the stairwell, illuminating the foyer. Patricia froze. Her head jerked up, eyes meeting mine across the open space. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Two women who had played the same game for too long. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady though my hands were shaking. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes widened, but only for a second. Then she smiled, a small, eerie smile. "Oh, Mom," she said sweetly, "you scared me. I thought you were asleep." "Really?" I took a step down the stairs, keeping my voice calm. "Then why are you here with two men I've never seen before?" One of them muttered something under his breath. Patricia's mask began to slip. "They're their security. Victor sent them to check on you." "Security doesn't break locks," I said. She exhaled sharply, glancing toward the kitchen, maybe hoping for an escape route. "Look, this isn't what it looks like." "Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like," I replied. "And you should know by now, Patricia, I'm not as blind as you think." For a second, her expression hardened. The sweetness drained from her face, replaced by something sharp and furious. "You could have made this easier," she hissed. "You had more money than you could ever spend. You should have just signed it over." My chest tightened. "Signed it over? To you? After everything your husband and I built?" She took a step closer, her voice low and venomous. "Victor doesn't have the stomach for this. But I do. He thinks you'll forgive him. I think you've already had your time." The sound of distant footsteps outside made her pause. Then, the back door burst open. Officer Martin's team flooding the house with flashlights and shouts. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" The two men panicked. One dropped the crowbar and bolted for the window. The other froze, lifting his hands. Patricia turned toward them, stunned, realizing too late that she'd walked straight into a trap. Martin's voice boomed from the doorway. "Patricia Whitmore, step away from the stairs." For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of me, not of what she'd done, but of being caught. "Wait," she cried, raising her hands. "You don't understand." "I was checking on her. Checking on me," I interrupted, stepping off the last stair. "With armed men. In the middle of the night." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The men were already being cuffed, one of them shouting that she'd paid them to. Make it look like a break-in. Martin glanced up at me, his face grim but reassuring. It's over, Margaret. You're safe. But it didn't feel over. My entire body shook as I watched Patricia's lies unravel in real time. Margaret? A voice shouted from the front door. It was Victor. He stumbled in, pale and wide-eyed, still wearing his jacket from work. What's going on? Why are there police here? Patricia spun toward him, desperate. Tell them. You know I'd never. But her husband wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. The truth was already in his eyes. Mom, he whispered, please tell me this isn't real. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was all some misunderstanding, but the sight of the crowbar on the floor and the broken glass beside Patricia's shoes stopped me. It's real, I said quietly. She came here tonight with these men to hurt me. Patricia let out a shriek, lunging toward Victor. She's lying! Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn you against me. Enough! Martin barked. We have it all on recording. She froze. Her head turned toward me, eyes blazing. You set me up. I met her gaze and said the words I'd been holding back for weeks. No, Patricia, you set yourself up. The officers led her away in handcuffs, her cries echoing down the hallway. Victor stood rooted to the floor, his face ashen. When the door finally closed behind them, the silence that followed was suffocating. He looked at me like a child lost in a storm. Mom, how did it come to this? I didn't have an answer. I just reached out and touched his hand. Sometimes, I said softly, the people we love most teach us what fear really means. That night, when the lights dimmed and the officers left, I sat alone in the living room. The clock ticked toward 9:15 again, that cursed minute etched into my memory. My phone lay on the table beside me. For the first time in weeks it didn't ring. But even in the silence I could still hear her voice. Mom, are you alone? Only now, I wasn't afraid of that question anymore. Because I knew the truth, being alone was safer than being surrounded by the wrong kind of love. The house was too quiet after the police cars left. The blue and red lights had painted my walls like a fever dream, and now, only the echo of their sirens lingered in my mind. I stood by the staircase, barefoot, the marble floor cold beneath me. Victor sat on the couch, his head in his hands. The man who once used to run around this house in his little league uniform now looked like a broken shell. Mom, he whispered, voice trembling. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know she'd go that far. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I looked at him, and all I could see was the little boy who used to build Lego castles in the corner of my living room. And the man who grew up to help destroy the very real one I built. He got up, his eyes red, and tried to reach for my hand. I pulled back instinctively. His face fell. Mom, please, I'm your son. Don't look at me like that. My voice finally broke free. Then tell me, Victor, what did you think she was planning? You watched me drown in loneliness while you stood beside her. You heard her talk to me every night. You knew. He looked away, ashamed. She said you were losing your mind, that you were being paranoid. I believed her. God, I was so stupid. The truth hit me harder than I expected. He wasn't lying. He truly didn't know the depth of Patricia's game. But that didn't wash away the years of silence. The dinners missed, the cold looks, the quiet alliance he formed with his wife. Martin came back later that morning with paperwork, asking me to sign the formal statement. I nodded numbly and scribbled my name. Will she get bail? I asked. Maybe, he said carefully, but it won't be soon. There's enough evidence to keep her in custody for a while. I closed the door behind him and stood alone again. The house smelled of roses and burnt fear. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. That night I sat by the fire with a glass of wine. The housekeeper, Emily, hovered at a distance, unsure whether to speak or not. Finally, she placed her hand gently on my shoulder. Mrs. Walker, you should rest. I smiled faintly. Rest. Emily, I've been resting for years. That's how they managed to creep so close, while I was busy resting. She said nothing more, just nodded and left quietly. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, until a voice whispered on the other side, Margaret. It was Patricia. My spine stiffened. How did you get this number? Her voice was low, shaking. From Victor's phone. They let me make one call. What do you want? I asked coldly. To say, I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted you to be scared, not hurt. I almost laughed. You broke into my home, Patricia. You planned every call, every lie, every manipulation. You wanted me terrified. Silence. Then she said something I didn't expect. Victor's not as innocent as you think. The line went dead. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The sound of the fire cracking behind me seemed louder. Was she lying? Or was there still more rot beneath the surface of this family I thought I knew? The next morning, I found Victor in the garden, watering the plants like nothing had happened. I watched him from the balcony for a long time. There was something off about how calm he looked. When I finally walked down, he smiled faintly. "Morning, Mom. You should eat something. Patricia called me," I said flatly. His hand froze midair. "What?" "She said you're not innocent." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "She's lying. Trying to drag me down with her. Then tell me, Victor," I said, stepping closer. "Why were her men using the security codes to my house? Who could have given them those, other than someone who lived here once?" His eyes darted away. I don't know. Maybe she guessed them." I smiled bitterly. "My codes change every month." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. That evening I went to the police station again. I asked Martin if I wanted to press charges against both of them. Would that be possible? He hesitated. "If you have proof." "I'll find it," I said quietly. "Trust me, I will." For the next few days I combed through every security record, bank statement, and phone log. And there it was, small but damning, a bank transfer from Victor's account to one of the men caught outside my gate. When I showed it to Martin, his eyebrows shot up. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "I've been sure for a long time," I replied. I just didn't have the strength before. When Victor was taken in for questioning, he didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. "I didn't want to hurt you," he told me later, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted what was mine." I stared at him through the glass window of the interrogation room. "And you would have killed me for it." He shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "No, Mom, never. But Patricia, she said if you were out of the way, everything would come to us faster." I thought she meant a will, not this. His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the frightened boy again. But that didn't make it right. Love doesn't erase betrayal. When I left the station that day, I felt strangely light, not happy but free. For years, my life had revolved around family dinners, charity galas, and maintaining a perfect image. Now I was standing in the ashes of all that perfection, but I was still standing. That night, I wrote a letter to my lawyer. I rewrote my entire estate plan, not out of revenge, but clarity. No one who had tried to harm me would benefit from my kindness again. I added a final clause in bold letters: "Forgiveness is earned, not assumed." I sealed the letter, turned off the light, and for the first time in months, slept without fear. But deep down I knew this wasn't the end. It was the calm before a new storm. The days that followed were slow and strange, quiet but not peaceful. The silence in my house wasn't the comforting kind anymore. It was thick like the air before a thunderstorm. Reporters camped outside my gates, hungry for headlines about the heiress who outsmarted her own family. I stopped reading the news after the third day. Every headline felt like a wound reopened. Family fortune food son and daughter-in-law arrested in shocking plot. They made it sound like a soap opera. But this wasn't fiction. It was my life. The ruin of everything I'd built. I spent most mornings sitting by the window with coffee, staring at the garden Victor once cared for. The flowers were beginning to wilt. I didn't have the heart to replace them. Emily would try to cheer me up. "Mrs. Walker," she'd say softly, "maybe you should go out for a while. See your friends." I smiled faintly. "Friends? You mean the ones who whispered behind my back when Patricia started spreading rumors that I was losing my mind?" She said nothing, only sighed. She didn't need to. I knew she cared. She was the only one who'd stood by me through everything. Then, one afternoon, Martin came by again. He wasn't in uniform this time, just jeans and a worn leather jacket. "I needed a break from paperwork," he said with a smile. "Thought I'd check on you." I poured him some tea, grateful for the company. "You should be at the station," I said. "I'm sure there are people who need your attention more than an old woman hiding in her house." "An old woman who caught 2 criminals without firing a shot," he said, raising an eyebrow. "I'd say you're exactly the kind of person worth checking on." I laughed softly, the first genuine laugh in weeks. You're kind, Martin, but I'm just tired. I get it, he said gently. But don't let them win twice. What do you mean? You already stopped them from taking your money, he said. Don't let them take your peace too. His words stuck with me. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I replayed his voice in my head. Don't let them win twice. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went out. Drove downtown. People stared, of course, whispering when they recognized me. I ignored them. I went to the art gallery I used to sponsor and spent hours walking through the halls. It was quiet there. Peaceful. For a while, I could almost forget everything, until I saw her. Standing near the entrance, a woman I didn't recognize at first. Then my stomach dropped. It was Patricia's mother. Her eyes met mine, full of something between anger and pity. She walked toward me, heels clicking against the marble floor. Mrs. Walker, she said coldly, I suppose congratulations are in order. You've destroyed my daughter's life. I stayed calm. Your daughter destroyed her own life. I only stopped her from taking mine. She scoffed. You think she acted alone? You think she didn't have help? My heart skipped. What are you implying? She leaned closer, her perfume cloying and sharp. Let's just say Patricia wasn't the only one who wanted your fortune, Margaret, and not everyone got caught. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the echo of her words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what she said. Not everyone got caught. I went through my papers again, my accounts, my trust records. Nothing unusual. But then I opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. The charity fund Victor managed for the Walker Foundation. The numbers didn't add up. Nearly $500,000 were missing, funneled into shell accounts under fake names. But one of the signatures, it was familiar. It wasn't Victor's. It was mine. Only it wasn't. Someone had forged my signature. I called Martin first thing in the morning. He came over with his laptop and scanned through the files. You're right, he said grimly. This isn't your handwriting. Whoever did this knew your accounts inside out. Could it still be Victor? I asked quietly. He shook his head. No, he didn't have access to these after Patricia took over the foundation management 2 years ago. I blinked. Patricia and who else? He scrolled through the records. A joint manager, your accountant Samuel Reed. My heart sank. Samuel had been with me for 15 years. I trusted him more than anyone. He was the one who managed my taxes, my will, my donations. Martin frowned. Want me to dig into him? I nodded. Do it. And Martin, don't tell anyone I know. But for the next few days, I went about my routine like nothing had happened. I smiled at the staff, answered calls politely, even attended a charity brunch, all while Martin quietly investigated. Then, one evening, as I was sitting on the terrace watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. A message from Martin. Just 3 words. You were right. He called right after. Your accountant's been moving money into his own offshore accounts for months. He probably thought with Patricia in jail, you'd be too distracted to notice. My hand tightened around the phone. Can you prove it? I already have. I'm filing the report tonight. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, Martin. You've done more for me than my own family ever did. He paused for a moment. That's because I see you for who you are. Not just a rich woman, but someone who refuses to be broken. After the call ended, I stood there in the fading light. The sea breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from the garden. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, not because justice had been served yet, but because I finally had clarity. Everyone I trusted had been tested, and I had survived every betrayal. I turned toward the mirror hanging by the window and saw my reflection. Older, yes, but sharper, stronger. I whispered to myself, "You're still here, Margaret. You're still standing." And for the first time, I believed it. But little did I know, the final confrontation would be nothing like I expected, because the one person I thought I could finally trust was about to reveal something that would change everything again. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. I should have felt relief. Samuel's fraud was exposed, Patricia was still in custody, and Victor had stopped calling. But there was something else I couldn't shake off. A subtle discomfort every time I thought about Martin. He'd been helpful, almost too helpful, always one step ahead, always knowing exactly what to look for. One evening as I was finishing dinner alone, Emily came into the dining room looking uneasy. "Mrs. Walker, that officer, Mr. Martin. He was here earlier while you were out. I frowned. Did he say why? She hesitated. He said he needed to check your security footage again, but he didn't tell me what for. Something twisted in my gut. And you let him in? She nodded nervously. He showed his badge. I forced a smile, reassuring her. It's all right, Emily. You did the right thing. But my mind was already racing. Why would Martin need my security footage again when the case was practically closed? I waited until midnight before checking the system myself. The recordings from the last 3 days, gone. Deleted. My hands shook as I stared at the empty timeline on the screen. Only one person had the access codes besides me. Martin. I couldn't sleep that night. Memories of our conversations replayed in my head. The times he'd called me smart, brave, different. The times he'd said I reminded him of his mother. It all felt suddenly calculated. By morning, I had decided to confront him. When I called, he answered on the second ring, his voice calm as ever. Morning, Margaret. I need to see you, I said. At my house. Noon. There was a brief pause. Then, of course, he arrived exactly on time, like always. He was smiling when he walked in, casual, confident. But I could see the flicker of surprise in his eyes when he noticed my tone wasn't warm anymore. Something wrong? He asked. I gestured toward the monitor on the table. The footage from the last 3 days. Gone. You were here last night, weren't you? His smile didn't fade, but his jaw tightened slightly. I was. I needed to cross-check some timestamps. But deleting everything. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't understand, Margaret. There's more going on here than you think. I crossed my arms. Then explain it. He met my eyes, calm but unreadable. Samuel isn't the only one who's been stealing from you. I have reason to believe there's a larger network. People inside the department. People tied to your husband's old business partners. My husband had been gone for 15 years. His name hadn't come up once in all this mess. Why would they care about me now? Because you're still holding on to something they want, he said quietly. I frowned. What could I possibly have that matters to them? He hesitated. Your late husband's second trust account, the one registered in Bermuda. My breath caught. Only 2 people knew about that account, my husband and me. Even Victor didn't know. How do you know about that? I whispered. Martin exhaled. Because I was the one assigned to your husband's case years ago. Before I ever met you. I stepped back. His case. He died of a heart attack. He looked at me sadly. That's what the official report said. But there were inconsistencies in the finances. Offshore accounts, missing ledgers. We suspected money laundering, and your husband's associates weren't small players. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. You used me. He didn't deny it. At first, yes. I thought I could use this situation to get to those records, but then I realized something. You didn't know any of it. You were innocent. Innocent. I repeated bitterly. You broke into my home, deleted my files, lied to my face, and you call me innocent. He stepped closer, his voice low. I was trying to protect you, Margaret. If they know you still control that account, you'll be their next target. Protect me. I scoffed. You sound just like Patricia. Every liar says they're protecting me. Something shifted in his eyes. Frustration, maybe even regret. You can believe what you want, but you need to get out of town for a few days. Please, let me handle this. I stared at him for a long time, my heart pounding. Then, slowly, I smiled. You're right. I should leave. That night, I packed a small bag, just enough to make it look like I was going away. Then I called Emily into the study. Emily, I said softly, no one comes into this room tonight. No one. Not even Officer Martin if he returns. She looked confused but nodded. After she left, I opened my laptop and set up a hidden camera feed linked to my phone. I wanted proof, not just suspicions. At exactly 1:43 a.m. the motion alert went off. Martin. He was back. He entered quietly, wearing gloves, moving straight to the safe behind the bookshelf, the safe that contained old estate files, and a decoy USB I'd placed there hours earlier. He took it, pocketed it, then looked straight into the camera and smiled. I froze. He knew. The next morning I called my lawyer and forwarded him the footage. Within an hour, the file was in the hands of the district attorney. Martin was arrested that afternoon. When they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me once, not angry, not ashamed, just tired. You should have trusted me, he said quietly. I looked him straight in the eye. and you should have remembered who you were dealing with. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fire once more. The house was finally quiet, not from fear, but from closure. Patricia, Victor, Samuel, and now Martin. Each of them had underestimated me, thought my age or grief made me blind. But I'd survived them all. When Emily came in to ask if I needed anything, I smiled for the first time in weeks. No, dear. I think I finally have everything I need, and as the firelight flickered against the walls, I realized what revenge really meant. It wasn't screaming or fighting, it was surviving, outliving every person who tried to destroy you. And I had done exactly that, but even then, one thought lingered in the back of my mind. If my husband's secrets had drawn all this chaos to my door, what else was buried in the past that I still didn't know? For weeks after Martin's arrest, I tried to convince myself it was over, that the circle of betrayal had finally closed. Yet at night, when the house went quiet and the clocks ticked too loudly, I still felt a presence, like unfinished business breathing down my neck. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was instinct. One morning, while sorting through old documents in my late husband's study, I found something strange, an envelope hidden behind a false panel in his desk drawer. It was sealed with red wax, his initials pressed into it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were a few letters, all addressed to me, but never sent. The first was dated 2 weeks before his death. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in time. There are things I did to protect us, to protect the fortune and the family name. Not all of it was clean. I trusted the wrong people, and they're still out there. If anything happens to me, contact the one man who knows the truth, Martin Hale. My breath caught. Martin's name. I sank into the chair, my pulse racing. My husband had known him. Years before all this. Everything Martin said was true. But the part that made my blood run cold wasn't the warning. It was the last line. If you can't trust him, trust no one. For hours, I sat there reading and rereading those words. A storm of anger, confusion, and sorrow churned inside me. Had my husband truly believed this man could protect me? Or had Martin used this connection to manipulate me all along? Later that evening, I visited the storage vault downtown where my husband's old ledgers were kept. I hadn't looked at them in years. The air inside was cold and heavy, the smell of dust and metal filling my lungs. As I flipped through the files, something caught my eye. A ledger marked Private Holdings 2005-2009. Inside were details of offshore transfers to names I recognized from the news. Corporate heads, politicians, even law enforcement officers, people who were now long gone or living quietly in retirement. It wasn't just money laundering, it was control, influence, power, and my husband had been right in the middle of it. Suddenly, everything made sense. Patricia's obsession with the fortune, Victor's greed, Samuel's betrayal, Martin's double life. None of it had started with me. I was simply standing in the blast radius of my husband's buried sins. I left the vault with the ledgers in hand and a strange calm in my chest. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being the victim of secrets I never asked for. That night, I sat by the fire, the same spot where I'd once shaken with fear. I poured myself a glass of wine and dialed my lawyer. "Burn it," I said. "Every offshore account, every trust linked to Richard Walker's business. Close it all. Donate the remaining funds to the Foundation for Women's Shelters, anonymously." He hesitated. "Margaret, that's over $39 million. "I know," I said quietly. "It's the price of peace." When I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. My wealth had become my curse, chaining me to people who saw me as a target instead of a person. But now, for the first time, I owned my freedom, not my fortune. A week later, I received a letter from Victor. It wasn't a plea, just a broken man's apology. "Mom, I was blinded by her. I see it now. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you know I never stopped loving you. I'll live with this guilt for the rest of my life." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need revenge anymore. That had already been delivered by the truth itself. As spring arrived, the house began to feel alive again. The roses bloomed, the sunlight spilled through the tall windows, and the sound of laughter returned, faint but real. Emily's grandchildren visited sometimes, filling the halls with energy I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, I stood in the garden, watching them run across the lawn. Their joy was so pure, so untouched by greed or deceit that I almost forgot everything that had happened. Almost. Martin's words still echoed in my mind sometimes. "You should have trusted me. Maybe, in another life I would have." Maybe if he'd come to me honestly, things would have been different. But trust, once shattered, can't be rebuilt. It can only be remembered as a lesson. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I wrote one final note in my journal. I lost my family, my illusions, my safety. And yet, I found something far more precious, myself. I closed the journal and looked around the room. The same mansion that once felt like a golden cage now felt like sanctuary, not because it was perfect, but because it was finally mine. As I walked upstairs, the hallway lights flickered softly, casting shadows on the portraits that lined the walls. Generations of walkers staring down at me with their cold, painted eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel judged by them. I felt above them. When I reached my bedroom, I stood by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. The air was cool, the night quiet. "Richard," I whispered, "I forgive you, but I won't carry your ghosts anymore." The reflection in the glass looked back at me, older, wiser, unbroken. The woman I had become wasn't the same one who used to wait for her daughter-in-law's nightly calls or her son's attention. That woman had been burned away in the fire of betrayal, and what remained was something far stronger. I smiled to myself, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness fill the room. Peaceful this time, not frightening. Because I knew that whatever came next, I could face it alone, and that was my victory. If you were in my place, would you forgive your family after such betrayal, or walk away forever? Tell me in the comments. And remember, revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's simply choosing peace when everyone expects you to fall apart.